Before we dive into this episode, most business owners we find struggle with time management, cash flow, and actually scaling their business. We really feel like we have to work this out on our own. This isn't really the case. We built Invisify, and this is a way that we can help you achieve those outcomes in your business for free. So check out the show notes below, click on the link, and see how we can help you through Invisify build and scale your business, which becomes your ideal business. Hi, it's Paul Antonelli here. Welcome to another episode of the Ideal Business Podcast. If you're listening to this, you won't see what I've got on my head. If you're watching this, you'll see what I've got on my head. I've got a hat. Today what I'm going to talk about is hat and hatting. This is a term that we use, and it's absolutely fundamental to building an ideal business, absolutely fundamental. And what I'm going to talk about today is what is it, why is it important, and how can you use it effectively as part of the process of constructing and building your ideal business. Maybe I might share a story, and look, it's probably a common story. It's a story that happens often in business, and what happens effectively is that, you know, as the business starts to grow, when you run a business originally, you do everything in the business. You're the person. You're the go-to person. You have to solve all the problems. You know, there's not enough money to hire staff, so you're doing everything yourself, and you just have to do what you have to do. It's just the nature of running and starting a business from scratch. And then over a period of time, you realize you can't continue to do that and you can't grow the business, so then you bring other people in. And a lot of business owners, a lot of people who have started businesses get really frustrated with this process. And a lot of the reason the frustration takes place is because the expectation and the misalignment of your expectations as the business owner and engaging someone to do a particular activity or take on a particular hat and theirs. And so this leads to frustration. It's like, why do I bother? I can do it myself. You know, these are all, if you've been in business before, you know the story. So it's a common problem in business. And I learned this myself the hard way in many of the businesses I've been in. You know, I'd sort of get rid of things, and it would frustrate me, you know, more often than not, it would really frustrate me. Why? You know, brought someone on board, they've got expertise in this area. Why isn't it working? You know, how come they're not doing that? Why are they doing that? There's gaps in what they're doing. They're not producing the right outcome. You know, there's all sorts of questions. And I think before you can sort of start pointing the finger at the new person, the key question that I realized was, have they been hatted? Is there a hat for the role? And look, it's not always the case. You know, it might just have been someone who's not the right fit for the business, but it's not possible. It's really not possible to determine or to make statements relating to the person themselves and the way they're operating or functioning unless you can find and put in place a hat and they have been effectively hatted. So let me explain a little bit more before I talk a little further on that. So that's why I'm talking about this particular subject today. Is it really, when you have hats in your business and you've hatted people properly, there's less insanity. That's the only way to describe it. So this is a hat. I've got one on my head. It's a black hat. But as a business owner, you have many hats. You know, you have the marketing hat, you have the business owner hat, you might deliver the product that you've got hat, there's a quality hat, and, you know, HR recruitment. There's all these hats in a business. And typically what's happening is you're taking one hat off and you're putting the hat back on, or you're putting a different hat on. Lots of this stuff takes place in a business, and it happens without you knowing it. And you'll seamlessly, and often the confusion that you might have as a business owner is, look, I don't have enough time to do that. You don't even realize you move in between these various hats. And so one of the things that's necessary in order to grow and expand a business is to be very good at hatting, writing hats, which is a way, a particular format, sort of, you know, I guess you'd call it a job description. It's a little bit different for us, but it's a way that describes very effectively what that person should be doing. And there's some key components to that, which I'm going to talk about at the moment. And then making sure that any person who picks up that role, whether now or in the future, is hatted effectively, which means they understand They've seen the hat and they've been trained on the hat. I'm going to talk about a little bit high level now so you can get an understanding. So the first thing is we have a template for a hat, which we can share with you if it's something you want to get access to. And the first thing is the person has to understand the purpose of that particular role. And so a hat might be a role, but it might be relating to a particular activity in a particular department or section. So you might have a hat which could be, for example, the marketing director, the general manager, the financial manager, the sales manager. These are all hats that you can create, but you could also create a hat for a specific activity. And that activity could be, for example, social media, marketing. It could be on how to reporting, creating financial reports. And so they could be sub-hats for a particular role. So when you think about it, it's really about making sure that you have policies and procedures and a framework for sharing information with your team about what's expected and what they need to do. So the first thing with a hat is you need to have a purpose. It's really important that it's clearly defined and the person knows what they're there to achieve. It's important that they understand who they report to. If they've got any questions, who do they need to contact? And so and if you've got an organising board, an organisation chart, then it should be shared with them so they go, oh, and they understand where they fit in the organisation. That's really, really important. And part of it is really clear summary of any other policies, procedures, checklists, anything else that might exist that are going to be required for them to effectively carry out the hat. And it needs to be shared with them and they need to be aware of it. So the trick is to put everything in the hat. The hat is a one spot where you might have stuff spread all over the place, but the beauty of a hat is you bring it all together and there's links. Maybe you could use links to different places, but at least they know there's one document which they can look at and they can get a very clear picture, very, very clear picture on what it is that they're trying to achieve. And the other key things that should come out from the process of a hat is what are their outcomes. We call it valuable final products. What's the products that they should produce? And it's not, because you can have two types of descriptions for a hat. You can talk about the activity, which is, these are the various activities. Activities are things that people do, but it's not necessarily outcomes that come from it. So through an activity, any activity, it produces an outcome. And so the important thing is to make sure that they're aware of not only of the activity, do this, do that, this is things you need to do on the first week of every month and blah, 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 blah. But you also have to talk about the product. What are they producing? What are the outcomes? And what you'll find is both activity, a lot of activity and the products should be measurable and there should be statistics that relate to those products. So in essence, a hat is a very clear document which minimizes the lack of alignment and mis-expectations when you engage someone to do an activity that you might have been doing before, because you're sharing all the required information with them. You're also talking about all sorts of important things that they need to understand, the purpose, who they report to, the activities, and also things like what the outcomes, what are the products and the statistics, the numbers that relate to that process. Hat can be quite brief, can be 1 or 2 pages, or could be a little bit more detailed. We don't try to make it a massive document. We try to keep it to the point and sharp, and we use Backpack, which is our platform, where there's templates and checklists, and we have a standard template for a hat. So that's what a hat is. And as I mentioned previously, you can use a hat it can be for a job description as you might use, or a role description, but it can also be for a particular activity. And then we use the term all the time, has the person been hatted? Has hatting taken place? And so it talks about there needs to be a hat, which is what I've just described, but there's not much point if there's a hat and the person hasn't been hatted through that hatting process. Sounds like a Mad Hatter's process, doesn't it? What I want to do is just share a little bit more information about Invisify, which I mentioned at the start of this podcast. As you know, this podcast is all about helping people build their ideal business. Now, if you want a structured plan and a process to do that, then you really need to check out Invisify. Invisify provides the end-to-end solution for someone to build, operate, and actually be able to extract from their business. And how does it do that? Well, it has a whole range of different components. Firstly, it's a philosophy and a strategy. Getting the philosophy and the strategy right at the beginning, and that really focuses on Why are you in business? What sort of life do you want to achieve? What's your ideal life look like? This is the absolute start point, and we call that the foundations. From there, we've got detailed training in every part of the business, not just training, but actually the tools, the framework, and the checklists so that you can apply the training in a practical sense. So you can actually implement and have it make a difference to the way that you structure your business. What I've found over the years is there's lots of training and information on what you should do, but how you go about doing it is what's lacking. And that's what we really wanted to identify and create, was the how. So check out Invisify. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can find out how to apply this approach to you, your business, which will help you move towards an ideal life through creating an ideal business. Check out the link in the show notes. And the best part is it's free to get going and check out what's on offer. Do it today. Eventually what you want to do in your own business, if that's, if it's part of your ideal business picture, is to hang on to the hats that you enjoy and the things that you like and pass on these hats. From my experience, if you don't create a detailed and comprehensive hat with all those various components, and you don't hat people effectively, making sure they've gone through a proper hatting process, often there's a disappointment or frustration in relation to the way a new person's performing, or a person in that role, and things keep on bouncing back to you. They just keep coming back. And so when that takes place with any new person that comes into the organization, or a new activity that I used to manage and someone else is doing it, I pass it on to another team member. Whenever it's not quite going right, the first question I ask is there a hat? As you appreciate, I'm not sort of involved day to day, and this actually took place. We had in one of the businesses, we've got some sales activity, and we're not getting results. We weren't getting we weren't getting the outcomes that we were looking for, but people were busy and they were doing lots of, this and that, lots of activity. And it looked like everything should be going well, but there was a bit of frustration about the outcomes. Oh, a person wasn't doing that. And so I asked a simple question: is there a hat? Can you show me the hat for this particular role? And there was no hat. I went, oh, that's interesting. So whilst there was a lot of discussion about the person and the way they performed and whether they were doing it well, and we're not sure, that's a sort of a secondary discussion, because the first discussion should be, is there a hat? The first question you ask, is there a hat? And if they say, yeah, there's a hat, and then the second question should be, has that person been hatted and trained effectively on the contents of that hat? So it's really important to in order to grow, continue to build a really great business, you just have to have hats. And if you want to extract yourself from the business, it's really important that it's fundamental that you look at all the hats that you're wearing, and you might have all these various hats. And it's a great way to think about that as there's a thing I call the time matrix, which is also in the book. There's another podcast on it which helps you identify the various hats that you're wearing in your business. If you haven't listened to that yet, go and check it out. And what you do is you identify, firstly, all those activities that you're sort of currently doing. You'd be surprised, because you'll find you'll be spread right across the organisation if it's in a startup or an early stage of your business. You'll be doing marketing stuff, and dealing with clients, and looking at finances, and you're looking at cash flow, and there's things you've got to set up, and legal stuff, and insurance, blah, blah, blah. There's so much in business. And so the idea is, if you can understand that, slowly moving yourself into a position where you're not involved across all these different areas, and you're not wearing all these different hats. Firstly, you have to identify the hats, and you go, which ones do I take up a lot of my time, or which ones I really don't like? And unfortunately, the reality is that if you want to effectively hand over that hat to someone else, you've got to write it up. You've actually got to write it up. It's not just employing someone and saying, oh, look, they were a marketing manager before, so they'll know how to do this. Because sure, they might have the skills for a particular role, but not the way that it operates and functions, and the way that you want it to happen within your own business. So don't make the assumption that because you're bringing someone in with expertise, that they'll just do it the way it should be done. Because if you've built a particular way of doing something in your business, you want to make sure that continues, particularly if it's something that works really well, that you've developed over many years. So this process is fundamental, and so we have, I don't even know how many hats across all our different businesses. We have many, many hats, both at a high level, general manager, of course, can be the high general manager of operations, and we've got marketing director, finance manager, public relations, establishment HR. We've got all these hats written, and then there's sub hats. And fundamental that for a business to function well, and what you'll find is that the more clarity any of your team members have, the better they'll perform and the more comfortable they are. No one really likes working in a position where they don't really know what's going on, and sometimes they're too afraid to ask in case they might ask some stupid questions. And so we don't make any assumptions. When someone commences with us, we make sure there's a hat in place and they get hatted. And when we have a problem, or when you have challenges with team members looking to employ someone, and those things are taking place, before you start looking at the particular person and are they the right fit, do they really care? The question should be, have you done what's necessary to get them into the best position for success? Have you really thought about and written the hat up? It's not just a verbal catch up, it's actually a written hat which has all the key information, as I've mentioned before. And has that hat been shared effectively, and have they received the required training to be able to execute the hat, and they have access to all the key documents, checklists, any information that they need, which will make it as effective and smooth for them in that role. If they don't, then that's a failing. I always see that as a failure on my part, but it's the first go-to point when there's a team member or there's an activity that's taking place that's not functioning that well. I always want to go back and look at the hat. Has it been documented? If someone's passed on a particular activity, because often what happens in a business, let's say in marketing, you might have a person doing marketing activity. Then as the business grows, those activities start splitting out. So you've got someone who's doing social media, and someone might be doing design activity, and someone's looking at emails, all these type of different activities. But every time something gets passed on, it's important that a hat is created. Otherwise, things fall through the cracks and things stop happening, which I talked about before, which can become very, very frustrating. So you make some progress and then it slides back. You make some progress and then it slides back. And so if you want to really make forward progress, you want to ensure that you create the best platform for anyone taking up a new activity or role. So that's what hats are all about. I'm pretty passionate about hats, as you've probably gathered. I actually need hats. I don't have any hair, so hats are really important. It keeps the sun off my head. But I've got a lot of hats. And one of the joys of building a business, an ideal business, as you go through the process, is realizing that you've been passing on and getting rid of your hats. And once you start seeing the benefits of that, which means you've effectively, that was stuff I used to do, I no longer do that. And it's not only is it happening as you were doing it, but actually better. If someone's coming in with more expertise and skills, and that's the ultimate objective, is have people that come into roles with external expertise, but marrying that with the knowledge and the expertise that you've built and developed in the business, that gives them the best foundation and platform to really have an optimum outcome for the business and for themselves. And it's actually quite rewarding, and you'll find it's quite freeing for yourself. And then it really opens up the possibilities of saying, well, I don't actually have to do all these things. So what I would always suggest is, if you've got a few things, if you're pressed for time, pick something that you're spending a lot of time on that's not a high value activity that you could hand on, and go through the process of constructing a hat as if you were going to hand it over to someone else at a high level of detail, and then go through the process of looking how you can remove that hat from your head and effectively pass it on to someone else. And it becomes a stepped process. It gives yourself, the business becomes less dependent on you. It creates more resilience in your business. And one of the things is you have less, because often what happens, and I don't know if this has happened for you in business, when you go, oh, I've got to employ, I've got to get a new person in that role, it's like, oh, it's a big stress out because you've got to sit down with them and it takes ages to get them up to speed and you've got to spend time with them, and all that sort of stuff. But, guess what? If you've had it effectively before, it's all there. And so there might be some contact time, but it's fairly minimal. And so it makes it really easy for bringing new people into a role or expanding that role where you might need 2 or 3 people in a particular role. There's just so many benefits in getting this process right and making it a standard practice for the way that you run and you operate your business. And it's a big factor in building a business that is independent from you and building an ideal business. So yes, that's hat and hatting. Once again, check out my book. I've got lots of details on it. In the podcast, there's one that talks about the time matrix, which is really important. It gives you an ability to work out which particular area maybe you want to look at getting someone to pick up some activities that you're doing. Thanks for joining me today on the podcast, and I look forward to catching up with you in the next podcast. Ciao for now. If you enjoyed today's podcast, then I recommend for you to check something out. I've written a book called Building Your Ideal Business, Live Your Ideal Life. So much of the content in this podcast has sort of come from the framework of that book, and also the Invisify platform, which I've mentioned before. Much of that content has come from this book as well. So if you've enjoyed the podcast and you want to find out more, please check it out. Look in the show notes. It's currently available on Amazon, and let me know what you think.